Hello students, in this session on verbal ability, we will deal with cloze test and inputs related to a cloze test. So what is exactly a cloze test? A cloze test is a short paragraph which is given to you with a number of blank spaces. You could also call it a small paragraph because it's not very long, and what is of essence is the number of blank spaces that it has. The number of blank spaces could be 5 or 10 depending on which exam you are going ahead and what is the pattern of that exam, but irrespective of how many blanks there are, the inputs related to solving these question types remains the same. Now, you need to understand that whenever anything in text in a written format is given to you, like a paragraph or a passage, the first thing that you need to do is to read it objectively. Now, by the word objective, I mean because in a cloze test, probably in every sentence or after every 2 sentences, you would come across a blank space. You should not get affected by that blank space and start looking at the options or be in a hurry to start filling up the blanks. The very first input is that you should read whatever the text presents, and while reading so, try to work out some option of some filler that you think is suitable to complete the idea that that blank space has created, the gap or the incompleteness that that blank space has created. And after you are done reading it, only then you should look at the options one by one. Most chances are, if you've been an avid reader and if you have a good command over the English language, you are able to grasp idea flow and there is some knowledge or reasonably good knowledge of vocabulary, it would not be difficult for you to hunt for words which will complete the idea. That means your mind itself will give you some answers to fill in or some words to fill in those blank spaces, and more often than not, it so happens that when you start looking at the options, you realize, oh, this is the word that I actually thought of to fill the given blank space. Now, it may either be the same word that sprang to your mind in the process of reading, or it could be a synonym or a similar word. Whatever the case be, you need to understand to pick up the most appropriate option. So, these questions, though are a bit complicated, they are not difficult or impossible to solve or undo, provided you give yourself ample practice and you have a consistent reading habit. Now, there are a few examples which I will present which have either 5 or 10 blanks, and I will help you understand how to go about them. So, you have on your screen the first passage. I will read it out for you and then we will understand how to go about these questions. Trade liberalization is supposed to dash a country's income by inducing resources to move from less productive uses, as economists would say, utilizing competitive advantage. But moving resources from low productivity uses to zero productivity does not dash a country, and this is what happened all too often under IMF programs. It is easy to destroy jobs, and this is often the immediate impact of trade liberalization. As dash industries close down under pressure from international competition, IMF ideology holds that now more productive jobs will be created as the old dash jobs that have been created behind protectionist walls are eliminated, but that is simply not the case, and few economists have believed in dash job creation, at least since the Great Depression. It takes capital and resources to create new firms and jobs. So, I read out the paragraphs for you and you realize there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blank spaces, and below that you have options. One for each option or for each blank there are 5 words given. Now, what you need to do is not to treat each blank or each sentence individually and try to establish a logical connect between each sentence and the other or each blank and the other, and then advance with your decision making or with choosing which word is the most appropriate to fill the blank. So, since I have already read out, we have already taken a look at the paragraph, we have read it. Now, let us take a look at each of the words in each option. For the blank number 1, the words given are augment, enhance, diversify, supplement and safeguard. So, keeping in mind trade liberalization, it can only enhance a country's income. Fine, you cannot have the word augment, but so I mean from this explanation, Enhance means to increase, and so option 2 or choice 2 is most relevant. Now, we need to also understand why the rest of the words do not work. So, looking at the second, the next word, augment. Augment is not suitable because the words augment and income do not collocate. Now, I hope you know the meaning of the word collocation. Collocation means a bonding between words. Whenever we use, let us say for example, an adjective and a noun together, we need to also keep in mind whether there is any relationship or bonding or pairing between these two words, and in this case, we cannot have the word augment to go with the word income, and so by this rule we have to eliminate option 1. Now, 3 says diversify. Trade liberalization is supposed to diversify a country's income. Now, something can enhance or improve or increase a country's income, it cannot diversify. So, therefore, even option 3 is not suitable. For the same reason, we cannot supplement or safeguard a country's income as a whole. Therefore, we understand they are absurd words, irrelevant words and not suitable. So, we move on to the second blank. The second blank has the words enrich, impact, improve, glorify and impoverish as options. So, it says, but moving resources from low productivity to zero productivity does not do something for a country. Now, what does it not do? I think enrich is our best bet because it cannot enrich a country. Okay. Moving from one area of low productivity to another area of zero productivity cannot make a country any richer. So, 1 seems to be the most likely choice. Impact, improve and glorify are not logical in the given context, and so we cannot go ahead with that. Impoverish means to make poor, and again this is also very illogical because if we move resources from from low productivity to zero productivity, it does not impoverish a country, has no logical or rational meaning behind it, and therefore we cannot go ahead with this choice. The third one now has the words manufacturing, wealthy, pharmaceutical, productive and inefficient. So, I will read out the sentence. It is easy to destroy jobs, and this is often the immediate impact of trade liberalization as dash industries close down under pressure from international competition. So, what kind of industries will close down under the pressure of international competition? Can only be those countries which are not good enough or efficient enough or productive enough. Now, among the given options, we have the word productive and inefficient, which probably may have drawn your attention because manufacturing, wealthy and pharmaceutical are all irrelevant. Now, we cannot go ahead with productive because if an industry is productive, then it will be well equipped to face international competition and it will not cow down under pressure. So, we cannot and because it has a positive connotation, we rule it out. We need something which is negative in nature, and we go ahead with choosing inefficient. Choice 5 is the correct filler for this blank. The fourth one now, IMF ideology holds that now more productive jobs will be created as the old dash jobs that have been created behind protectionist walls are eliminated. So, what kind of jobs that have been created behind protectionist walls? These could only be again inefficient, because if they were effective, then they would serve the purpose and they would not be cowering, or they would not get weakened under competition from external factors, or at an international level they would be competitive enough and they would have held their sway rather than weaken and fizzle out. So, effective does not work. Here too the choice is inefficient, active, constructive and accommodating are all irrelevant. The fifth blank says, but that is simply not the case and few economists have believed in dash job creation, at least since the Great Depression. So, the idea suggested is in the words, but that is simply not the case. Now, it shows that destroying old jobs alone is not sufficient, and therefore, people probably think that the idea is to create more jobs. And in what manner do we need to create these new jobs, or how these new jobs should be? Well, they cannot be terminal, because terminal is negative. Insufficient also has the same problem. Vigorous does not collocate with the word job creation, and we can rule it out. Vociferous cannot be used for job creation, so we are left with instantaneous, because it means immediately or at that very moment, and therefore it also justifies this phrase or this group of words that I read out, but that is simply not the case, and therefore we go ahead with choosing option 5 for completing the fifth blank. Now, let us move on to the second passage, which also has 5 blanks. I will read it out for you. Please follow on the screen. Mobility is not, as we are sometimes tempted to imagine, a or an dash of the relatively recent process of globalization. Before the frequent flyers and forced emigrants of today, who cover transcontinental distances and dash guarded borders, there was the quester. In the Atreya Brahanana, we find a passage that captures the essence of the quester's impulse. There is no joy for him who does not wander. Living among men makes even the finest of men a sinner. So one must wander. Such was the spirit that prompted figures like the Buddha and Saint Francis of Assisi in their diverse periods and cultural texts to dash the familiar world they had so far inhabited. At some point in his life, each of these figures appears to have heard a call or been possessed of a disquiet that prompted him to dash out into the cold and dark of the unknown territories stretching beyond the dash of home. Okay. So, this paragraph is about, or the passage is about mobility, and it tells us that if unless and until a person is mobile or on the move, he gets stagnated and may end up also becoming a sinner. So, it recommends or advises people to keep moving. Well, I hope you got an idea, an overall idea of what the text is trying to tell us. Now, as I told you earlier, we need not consider the text individually or each sentence as a standalone sentence. We have to take it into in its entirety and then look at the blanks. So, the first blank has the words doctrine, dogma, outcome, peculiarity and trait. Now, since the paragraph is about mobility, the only word that is suitable for the blank is outcome. Okay. Now, mobility cannot be a doctrine, it cannot be a dogma, it cannot be a peculiarity or a trait, and therefore, the word outcome as given in choice number 3 is our best bet. The second blank says, the frequent flyers and forced emigrants of today who cover transcontinental distances and dash guarded borders. So, these people who have been mentioned in the paragraph cross the guarded borders. So, those who cross guarded borders, that the only action that could be attributed to them is trespass. They don't oblige, they don't traverse, they don't tread, and they don't evict either. So, the best filler for this blank is trespass. We have choice number 2 as the correct answer for this blank. The next one says, to dash the familiar world that they had so far inhabited. Now, the people that we have read about that are mentioned in the paragraph are forced to give up the world in which they are living. They renounce the world and they move out. So, in this context, the only word that probably could be used to fill the blank is renounce. Okay, they renounce this world, they give up on worldly pleasures, they abdicate and they move on. So, we cannot use the word discard over here, because to discard a familiar word, discard means to throw away something which we don't need, or which we've already used and it's now of no use to us. So, in the context of familiar world, we cannot use the word discard. Renounce is the best choice. Abandon is also not correct. Desert and throw also don't collocate, and they don't give a grammatically correct idea. Fine. So, for the third blank, the answer is again the answer is choice number 3. The fourth blank now says, a call At some point in his life, each of these figures appears to have heard a call or been possessed of a disquiet that prompted him to dash out into the cold and darkness. Now, dash to move out into the cold and darkness is not an easy task. It needs a lot of courage to do so. So, let us look at the choices. It says, they say venture, dwell, drive, strike or advance. So, because the words cold and dark world outside have been mentioned, we can only look at venture, because only a person who is full of courage will venture out and do something daring or bold or something which others find difficult to deal with. Dwell is mostly used in the context of home. Drive is not right. Strike also does not, we can't, it's wrong to say that prompted him to strike out into the cold. It's not a war or an attack mentioned here. So, a strike is absurd, and advance also has no relevance. Fine. So, for question number 4, the answer is choice number 1. Fine. So, venture out into the cold and dark of the unknown territory stretching beyond the dash of home. Now, beyond the dash of home, shackles, regions, pleasures, comforts or joys. All of us are aware of the fact that a home gives us comfort, and in the context of someone giving up on worldly pleasures and what all a home provides, the best filler could only be comforts. Fine. So, for the 5th question or for the 5th blank, the answer is choice number 4. A home need not be always full of joys or pleasures, but it definitely provides comfort. So, here comfort is most suitable. Fine. So, till so far we have done 2 sets of 5 blanks each. Now, let us take a look at that passage or that paragraph which presents 10 blanks, and it is definitely a little more lengthy. Please keep track of whatever I am reading on the screen. Too much of dash, too much of what? Dash for education, dash children in two and throws away half. Children are turned into little exam takers far too early. To think of infants being sent home with homework to do is to dash a sort of dash miming. The half that's thrown away is the body and all the ways it can move and feel and be intelligent and cause delight. And of all the things the body can do, the richest, the most interesting, the most emotionally and intellectually dash thing is music. Every child needs to dash music as early as possible. And I don't mean just listen and then answer questions. I mean make with voice, with dash hands and dash feet, with instruments of every kind. First of all, I'd make sure that every school had a dash and qualified teacher of singing. Children will sing very willingly if they can see and hear that it's fun. Then I'd require every school to provide dash teaching for every child. The recorder used to be the first instrument children were given, but I am glad to see the guitar being used a lot nowadays. So, there are these 10 blanks that in the passage that's there on your screens, and there are also 10 choices. That means there are 10 possible choices. In every choice there are 5 options. Now, you need to look at each option and consider things according to which is the most suitable. Now, the grammatical connectors or links or clues that are present in the sentences should never be overlooked. In fact, they need to be focused upon for you to zero in on the right choice. So, let us take a look at the first set of options given for the first blank. Too much of what? Dash for education, dash children in two. Now, consider the preposition for. A short while ago, I mentioned the word grammatical clues and grammatical connectors. Now, there is a clue over here. The preposition for is to be used with a verb to form a phrasal verb. Now, among the choices given to you, poses, suffices, continues, passes and supplies, the only verb that can form a meaningful phrasal verb with the preposition for is passes. So, to pass for means to be accepted or regarded as something. Too much of what? Passes for education dash children in two. Fine. So, the idea is that something is presented as education and that is made to pass for education. That means it is not exactly education. It gives us the semblance of education, but it is not that what the author feels. Fine. So, the only possible eligible choice for this blank is option 4. I move on to the next one. It says too much of what passes for education dash children into. Now, because of the word to is given, the idea has already been initiated and says that whatever is presented in the form of education actually probably divides children into. So, keeping the word divide in mind, I told you earlier that while reading through, you will definitely have some word come up in your mind, and this word that springs to your mind could be the actual correct filler if it is there in the options, or you could choose a word which is similar in meaning and nature. Among the choices that I have for the second blank are words shakes, shapes, splits, spares and studies. In the context of division or divide, the best filler is splits. Now, the idea is that to separate or divide into parts of groups. So, too much of what passes for education splits children into and throws away half. So, the meaning is very clear, and so you get the answer for this blank as option 3. The next one says, to think of infants being sent home with homework to do is to dash a sort of dash maiming. In this paragraph, the first paragraph or the first part, we have understood that children are put into situation or put to learn something unduly, and those things are the hardship of taking an exam, and it happens too early in their lives. So, which is probably a needless burden on them, and therefore, the author says that being sent with homework to do is to think about a sort of dash maiming. So, the word that comes to my mind is think. Now, let us look at the choices. It says, they say contemplate, consist, complete, compare and cajole. Contemplate is the best filler here, because contemplate is. Now, the third and the fourth blanks must be taken together, considered together and filled in one go. I'll read out the sentence again. It says, children are turned into little exam takers. Far too early to think of infants being sent home with homework to do is to dash a sort of dash maiming. So, the word of essence here is the word maiming, and it definitely has a negative connotation. Therefore, for the third blank, the word that springs to my mind is think deeply about something. Now, giving children homework to do, or putting them to a task of taking exams is something which they do not need or they do not deserve at such an early age, and therefore, among the choices given, contemplate, consist, complete, compare and cajole, contemplate is the best bet, because it means think deeply. So, to think of infants being sent home with homework to do is to contemplate a sort of dash maiming. What kind of maiming can it be? If you do something willingly, you do something which is positive, but if you are doing something which is negative, it is intentional and it is meant to harm somebody, and in the context of little children being sent home with homework is definitely not something that would benefit them at that tender age, and the word which suits the blank is willful and not willing. So, we rule out willing, we rule out voluntary, compulsory and casual, and go ahead with willful. The next one says, the half that's thrown away is the body and all the ways it can move and feel and to be intelligent and cause delight, and of all the things the body can do, the richest, the most interesting, the most emotionally and intellectually dash thing is music. So, in this sentence, it is a long one, the author tells us about the positives of music. The author is insisting that every child should be made to learn music, to be made to listen to music, and therefore, if we considering what the author's mindset is, we can go ahead with only the word fulfilling, because it collocates with emotionally and intellectually, both of which are positive. So, all the words are actually participial adjectives and they describe something. So, we cannot have furnishing, humbling, silencing or abiding to match the terms intellectually and emotionally. So, the best word to fill the blank is fulfilling. fifth blank. Every child needs to dash music as early as possible. So, over here the word that comes to my mind in the context of music as proposed by the author for that every child must be made to experience could probably be learn. And let us look for such a similar word among the options. The options put before you are envy, envelope, embody, elevate and encounter. Now, encounter is the best choice because envy is negative and we do not need a word, a negative word here. We cannot have every child to envy music. We cannot have every child needs to envy music because that is not what the author intends. Envelope music also has no relevance in this context. Embody is of course very far-fetched and too extreme. Elevate is not related at all. So, the word most suitable for this blank is encounter. Okay. So, for this blank the relevant choice is choice number 5. And I do not mean just listen and then answer questions. I mean marks make with voice, with dash hands and dash feet, with instruments of every kind. Because there are two blanks in the same sentence, it would be easier for us if we look at both of them together and try to fill them together. So, for these blanks, the options for the first one among them is clapping, slapping, slipping, shaping and wiping. I do not think any of slapping, slipping, shaping or wiping work here because music, we are talking about music and we also have the words hands used in the sentence over here. So, the participial adjective collocates with the word clap, hands clap, and so the answer to this blank is choice number 1. Now, the second one says dash feet with instruments of every kind. So, just like we clap with hands, we stamp with feet. We can't stump, strive, rip or shiver. It can't be stumping feet, striving feet, ripping feet or shivering feet. Now, shivering of course is absolutely ruled out because it has a negative connotation, and here the author is telling us that children need to do this. They need to clap hands, they need to jump around, stamping their feet to the tune of music, to the sound of songs probably. And in this context, we have for this blank the fourth one as the correct choice. We are left with 2 more blanks to cover. First of all, I would make sure that every school had a dash and qualified teacher of singing. I mentioned the word grammatical tools or grammatical clues, and here the clue is the conjunction and. We all know that the conjunction and connects two similar entities. What the sentence says is dash and qualified teacher of singing. So, in the perspective of the author, there are people who are qualified and also because they are gifted people, because it is about a vocation, a calling, and among the choices acquired, talented, educated, approved and suited, the best word is talented. Talented and qualified. The author does not merely insist on the fact that the teacher needs to have some qualification in that field. She also must have the talent for music which she can impart to and passed on down to children. So, we rule out everything else and zero in on talented. Question number blank number 9, the answer is choice number 2. The final one for you now. The choices given are instrumental, provisional, usual, normal and imported. So, then I require every school to provide dash teaching for every child. What kind of teaching? There are two types of music. The types of music are music vocal and instrumental. The author has already mentioned that the recorder used to be the first instrument given to children earlier, and he is happy that it has been replaced by a guitar. So, when we focus on these words, we understand the author is talking about an instrument and not the vocal or oral form of singing. So, from the choices it is very obvious and very clear that the answer could only be instrumental. For the 10th blank, the filler is choice number 1. Please take a look at your screens. There is another set of 10 blanks for you. I will read out the passage and then we will consider filling up the blanks. Like people, wolves have found that there are dash to be had living in a group. Together they can move more effectively and take down large prey, raise families and dash their territory. The received wisdom is that there are also costs to group living, and not least a greater risk of death from catching a dash disease. Now, a team of ecologists working in Yellowstone National Park in Wyoming have found evidence that for wolves at least that is not always the case. Wolves were driven to dash by hunting in the Yellowstone region in the early 20th century, but were reintroduced in 1995 and have been closely dashed ever since by the National Park Service. This includes dash 25 or so wolves a year and fitting them with radio collars so they can't be dashed. Among the wealth of information this effort has produced, in 2007 researchers were dashed to a communicable illness creeping into the population. Known as mango, the disease is caused by parasitic mites that dash into the flesh of wolves, causing an extreme allergic reaction and driving them to dash to the point of losing large amounts of their fur. So, after I have read it out, I hope it is clear that the passage or the author of this passage talks about wolf population and also measures to save them from extinction. So, in the context we come across a number of blanks and let us look at each of them individually. Like people, wolves have also found that there are dash to be had living in a group. Together they can more effectively take down large prey. So, there are certain words which function as clues and they give away the idea, the connotation. Now, over here it says together. Now, together is something where in the context of wolves it is they are united or they stay as one, and more effectively is a positive word. So, then when we relate this idea to the previous blank, we understand that like people, wolves have found that there are probably some gains to be had living in a group. After this word, after the word that has come to your mind, let us look at the options. The options are assets, raises, benefits, liabilities and complaints. Of course, complaints is out because the sentence is very positive and indicates the what can be drawn from staying together. So, complaints is not correct. There is no liability that can be associated with wolves, no assets or no raises either. The plus points or the advantages are there in the form of benefits that these wolves have realized. The second one says they can more effectively take down large prey, raise families and dash their territory. So, when we talk about an animal, we understand that they always guard their territory so that other predators or other wild animals may not enter their area and be a problem to them. So, the words given to us are offend, contain, breed, depend and defend, and guard and defend are synonyms. So, we choose defend. That means for the second blank the option is 5, defend. The received wisdom is that there are also costs to group living, not least a greater risk of death from catching a dash disease. So, now the author takes us towards after broaching the subject with the positives of living together, the author now takes us to the harmful effects of group living, and in this context he mentions the word disease. So, we need to look at that adjective which collocates with the word disease. Dangerous, infected, curable, contagious and treatable all seem to work with the noun disease, but we need to keep the context in mind. The context says that there are also costs to group living. That means there are something which are not benefits or advantages all the time, and in this context only a contagious disease, that means a disease which spreads or causes infection or spreads from one member of the group to another is probably what the author has mentioned. So, we cannot say dangerous, infected, curable or treatable. The best collocation over here is contagious disease. Wolves were driven to dash by hunting in the Yellowstone region in the early 20th century. Well, because we've already taken a look at what the author is trying to tell us and understood that earlier in the beginning of the century, the number of wolves had almost come down to 0 and they were driven to extinction. It's a very clear and common collocation to say to be driven to extinction. Now, let us look at the options and see if there is a word which is of the kind that I have used. Of course, we cannot have driven to survival, we cannot have driven to exhaustion, rejection or inaction. The best word over here is driven to extinction. So, we choose choice number 4 for blank number 3 and we move on. But were reintroduced in 1995 and have been closely dashed ever since by the National Park Service. So, what does a National Park Service do? Now, after their extinction in certain parts of the country, the wolves were reintroduced, and when they were reintroduced, they would definitely be watched over, observed and ensured that they don't meet the same fate again. That means they do not come to the same level of being endangered or going into extinction. So, in the context of whatever I have just read out or told you, tutored is ruled out, restricted, studied and subdued also is ruled out. They were not studied, they were watched over carefully and only monitored works in this context, fine. So, for blank number 5, the answer is option or choice number 5. Now, after this, they were monitored and it was ensured that they do not again meet the same fate. This includes dash 25 or so wolves a year and fitting them with radio collars so that they can be dash. In order to keep track of them or in order to make sure that they are not again driven into extinction, the National Park Service people must definitely have kept a watch on their movements and these movements were recorded and studied. So, they had to be fitted with radio collars. Now, because wolves are wild animals, they would not definitely accept that they be fitted with radio collars when they are in a conscious state. So, for doing so, they must definitely have been sedated and only then collars could have been fitted on them. Among the choices given, ruffling, medicating, elevating, tranquilizing and infecting, the best word is tranquilizing. That means giving them a medicine or some sedative that could make them inactive for some time, and during that time they could be fitted with radio collars. So, this blank conveniently takes the word tranquilizing. Finally, after that it says so that they can be dashed. Now, after fitting them with radio collars, it would be easy to keep track of them or observe them so that they can be studied properly and they can be watched over. The best word over here is killed is out because killed is negative. Caged, they are not, it is not necessary for them to be caged. Studied, of course, but here in the context studied is not suitable, and treated, they are not ill or they are not infected and therefore they don't need not be treated. The best word is tracked. After fitting them with radio collars, the purpose is to keep track of them, of their movements, and so we go in with choice number 1. Among the wealth of information this effort has produced, in 2007, researchers were dashed to a communicable illness creeping into the population. So, one of the objectives of tracking these wolves is to monitor their health and their habits and conditions. Now, in spite of tracking, some kind of disease, probably contagious disease, took hold of them and this affected the wolf population. So, the author says among the wealth of information this effort has produced, that therefore, that means that the researchers were made aware of something, and that means a communicable or contagious illness that crept into the population. We have the words given to us as diverted, reminded, converted, alerted and accused. So, the most suitable choice can only be alerted, because alerted means that they were given some information or some clue as to some possible problem or danger that face these wolves or their population, and this is one of the objectives of the program. We move ahead with the next word now. It says, known as Mangue, the disease is caused by parasitic mites that dash into the flesh of wolves, causing an extreme allergic reaction and driving them to dash to the point of losing large amounts of their fur. So, what was the disease? The name of the disease has been given to you, and the diseases were caused by some parasitic mites. Now, what these parasitic mites did has been mentioned, that they did something to the flesh of wolves. Among the options we have borrow, inject, burrow, probe and admit. Because it is mites. Now, mites are those parasites or those organisms that make holes into wherever they are or onto any surface on which they are. Therefore, the word that is closest to the word digging a hole is burrow. They burrow into the flesh of wolves, mites that burrow into the flesh of wolves, because the passage tells us that mites are creatures that go inside the flesh of these animals, and it causes and they cause an allergic reaction which causes further problems for them. So, we cannot have borrow, of course. They don't inject anything, they neither probe or admit. The only thing is that they dig holes or gain entry into the animal's flesh, and the word that projects this is the word burrow. Driving them to dash to the point of losing large amounts of their fur. So, when these mites or when this contagion causes the disease, the flesh of the wolves get affected, and then when the flesh gets affected, it probably causes the animals a lot of allergic reaction which makes it very uncomfortable. Probably it involves some kind of scratching, and therefore it results in them losing a large amount of fur. So, we have the word scratch given to us in the very first option. It cannot be hatch, because we use hatch only in the context of eggs. Dispatch, of course, in the context of posting something or sending something. Match is absurd, and latch also doesn't make any sense. So, probably it scratched its ear, or it scratched some part of its body which was affected by the organism, and it resulted in that part being devoid of fur, which is the idea intended, right. So, I hope now, after all the blanks have been filled, you understood how to work with cloze tests. Please practice properly so that you gain command over this particular question type. Thank you.